Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to crack the code of life itself. We're talking about how scientists have tried for centuries to bring some order to the absolutely mind-boggling diversity of the natural world.
So let me ask you this. What do you, a mushroom, and a tiny little bacterium have in common? Sounds like a riddle, right? Well, the answer gets us into the super cool science of biological classification. This is basically the system we've built to map out the family tree of, well, everything that's alive.
I mean, think about it. For centuries, we faced this huge task. How do you make sense of millions and millions of different species? And this wasn't just for fun, like some academic hobby. It was a real, fundamental need to understand our world. To figure out what you could eat, what might eat you, and what was just plain weird.
So as you can see, it's been a long journey. We've had these classification detectives on the case for thousands of years. It started way back in ancient Greece, with Aristotle making the first real scientific attempt. Then, fast forward to the 1700s, Carl Linnaeus comes along with his two-kingdom system. And then, much more recently, in 1969, R.H. Whittaker completely shakes things up with a five-kingdom system. It really shows how our understanding of life is always changing.
Okay, so let's talk about that first big system. It was a great start. It definitely laid the foundation, but, well, it just couldn't handle all the new things we started discovering.
Back in the 1700s, Carl Linnaeus came up with this system that was, beautifully simple. He basically said, look, you've got two big buckets, Kingdom Plantae for all the plants, and Kingdom Animalia for all the animals. Simple, clean. What could go wrong?
Well, it worked for a while.
But the more we learned, the more the cracks started to show. The problem was, this simple system just threw wildly different things together. You had simple bacteria lumped in with complex trees, single-celled and multi-cell organisms all mixed up, and things like fungi, they got called plants, even though they don't make their own food. It was a mess. A whole bunch of life just didn't fit. Yeah. So what do you do with bacteria? Where do they go? And fungi, what about them? They're clearly not plants. The two-kingdom system just had no good answers. It was pretty obvious that science needed a new way of thinking, something that went deeper than just what things looked like on the outside.
And that's where our hero, R.H. Whittaker, comes in. In 1969, this American biologist steps onto the scene with a totally revolutionary idea that was about to change everything.
Okay, now this table really shows you the genius of Whittaker's idea. See, he didn't just add more boxes to put things in. His five kingdoms, Monera, Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia, were based on really fundamental differences. Things like what kind of cell is it made of? Does it have a cell wall? And how does it get its food? Basically, he set up a whole new set of rules. First, you look at the cell structure. Is it a simple prokaryote or a more complex eukaryote? Then you look at body organization. Is it just one cell or a bunch of them working together? Then, and this is a big one, how does it get nutrition? Is it a producer, a consumer, or a decomposer? He even started thinking about evolutionary relationships. Once you started asking these questions, the tree of life started to look a whole lot clearer. So let's see how this new system actually fixed all those old problems. Why did it work so much better? Let's take fungi. This is the perfect example. The old way just called them plants, which is just wrong. Fungi can't make their own food. They're heterotrophs. They absorb nutrients. Plus, their cell walls are made of something called chitin, completely different from the cellulose in plants. The new system finally gave them their own kingdom, right where they belong. I mean, just look at this mushroom. It's a classic fungus. It's a decomposer breaking down dead stuff for energy. That is fundamentally totally different from a green plant that just soaks up sunlight to make its food. Two completely different lifestyles. Whittaker also fixed the bacteria problem. He created Kingdom Monera, a home just for them. These are the prokaryotes, the simplest forms of life. And for centuries, they've just been kind of shoved into other groups where they really didn't fit. And then you've got Kingdom Protista. This was maybe his most brilliant move. It's kind of the catch-all drawer for all the single-celled eukaryotes, all the weirdos and misfits that weren't quite plants, animals, or fungi. It's like the bridge that links all the other more complex kingdoms.
Take Euglena, for example. When the sun's out, it acts just like a plant, making its own food through photosynthesis.
But here's the crazy part. That same Euglena, when it gets dark, will start hunting and eating smaller things, just like an animal. And then you have guys like this paramecium, which is basically a full-time microscopic predator. This is why Kingdom Protista was so important. It could handle all this incredible mixed-up diversity. But there's a twist. As great as Whittaker's system is, it's not perfect. It turns out there are some things out there that don't fit into any of the 5 kingdoms.
I like to call them the biological outlaws. We're talking about viruses, viroids, and prions. These things break the rules. They're not even made of cells, and they can't do anything on their own. They exist in this weird gray area, right on the edge of what we'd even call living.
Let's start with viruses. When a virus is just floating around, it's basically a non-living crystal. It's as inert as a speck of dust. But the second it gets inside a living cell, bam! It becomes this hijacker, taking over the cell's factory and forcing it to churn out millions of copies of itself. It's wild.
And just when you think it can't get any weirder, you meet the viroids. These are even simpler than viruses. They're just a tiny, naked piece of RNA. No protein coat, nothing, just raw genetic code. And yet, this little piece of nothing can cause huge problems for plants.
Okay, but the award for the most bizarre has to go to prions. Get this, they have no genetic material, no DNA, no RNA. They're just proteins that are folded the wrong way. And somehow, these wrongly folded proteins can bump into normal proteins and cause them to misfold, creating this chain reaction that leads to terrible diseases like mad cow.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Whittaker's 5 kingdoms were an absolute game changer. But these outlaws, the viruses, viroids, and prions, they're a powerful reminder that our work is never done. Our understanding of life is always a work in progress. It makes you wonder, right? If science is this continuous journey, what's the next big breakthrough in classification going to look like?